Hey everybody, welcome back to 20somethings TV. Hi, I'm right here. Hello. So we have a bunch of interesting topics this week, and I'm glad we highlighted Amanda first because we have a very interesting thing to start off with here. And Amanda, you're super passionate about it, so I'm going to let you take it away from here.
Okay, so yeah, our first story is quite an interesting one as it involves a professor at URI writing quite a controversial article. But before I get into it, I just want to say I'm making a disclaimer. We're not trying to defame her. We're just acting upon our First Amendment right to report on a public event. I'm mainly going to be pulling direct quotes from this article that she wrote so that, nothing's being misconstrued. Like, I'm just kind of trying to present exactly what she said. So, this professor, Donna Hughes, on her bio on the URI website, explains how she's a professor and holds the Eleanor M. and Oscar M. Carlson Endowed Chair in Women's Studies, and currently she serves as the Director of Graduate Studies in the GWS program. So she's come under fire recently for an article that she posted at the end of February that many are claiming to be transphobic. See, I am in one of her classes, actually, and I had no idea that this article was written until it was brought up to me last week in a different class, and I was like, it was, I don't know, kind of boggled my mind, and it took a month for me to, learn about this, and I'm in this woman's class, and I had no idea this was going on. But basically, the gist of her article compares the fantasy world that far-right people on QAnon live in to the more leftist transgender community that she repeatedly misidentifies as the trans sex fantasy or the trans sex/gender identity ideology. Specifically saying, these fantasies from QAnon on the right to trans sex/gender identity ideology on the left fly in the face of rationality and truth. So, she begins by talking about how misinformed, horrible, and violent the QAnon community is, referencing this attack on the Capitol in January, and then pivots to try and compare that to the transgender community, by which she claims, quote, real children are becoming actual victims, and that women's rights are being attacked by. So she seemingly misidentifies what the trans community is about when she says, quote, the trans sex fantasy, the belief that a person can change his or her sex either from male to female or from female to male, is spreading largely unquestioned among the political left. So here, this is just kind of a faulty claim, as she fails to acknowledge the difference between gender and sex, which is a core concept in gender women studies, and how being transgender means wanting to change your gender identity, not your sex, because we know sex is based on sex chromosomes that can't be altered, while gender is completely separate. That's why it's called transgender, not trans sex. I don't really know where she's getting that term from. But she goes on to say the biological category of sex, particularly woman's sex, is being smashed. Women and girls are expected to give up their places of privacy, such as restrooms, locker rooms, and even prison cells. When biological males identify as trans women, they can compete in women's and girls' sports. There are now cases of women being injured, some severely, by biologically larger and stronger biological men competing as trans women. She then goes to put a target on trans women by saying that their existence means female mammalian characteristics should be redefined and disappeared from the female body to satisfy the feelings of biological males who identify as women. She, a cisgender woman, is speaking over the voices of actual transgender people and their experience with gender confirmation surgery. Then, as she goes on to say, that teens believe that they can be medically transitioned into the other sex with full functioning sex organs, facing few complications. These are lies. Again, what she doesn't acknowledge is that trans people aren't trying to change their sex. They're trying to change their gender identity. And some choose to get surgery to help both affirm the gender they identify as and to quell the feelings of gender dysphoria, where how they identify internally doesn't match how they present externally. She then recognizes how most transgender people don't even receive gender confirmation surgery, but still makes sure to call it, quote, experimental and extremely disfiguring, saying that girls' female bodies are permanently scarred and destroyed from it. Again, she's speaking over the transgender community about something she, I assume, has no experience with, while many trans people have actually had very positive experiences when they have their gender confirmation surgery. She then compares gender confirmation surgery to eugenics, saying the sterilization of physically healthy individuals who fail to conform to society standards mirrors the forced sterilizations of people during the eugenics movement of the 1920s and 30s. The eugenics movement to breed a better race of people was a fantasy. So is the trans-sex movement. So that's a loaded statement. She then criticizes Biden's signing of the executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, going on to say that every person is entitled to dignity, civil rights, and human rights, but rights are based on laws, truth, and scientific reality, the best they can be established, not fantasies or feelings. She also then criticizes any attempts to hold people accountable for being transphobic or invalidating someone's gender identity when she says, quote, "The gender identity movement is canceling people's free speech and academic freedom for anyone who doesn't fall in line, speaks out in opposition, or even calls for the right to debate. People are losing social media accounts or being fired for misgendering someone or not affirming a person's claimed gender identity." Those are her air quotes, not mine. So that's basically the gist of everything that she wrote. What are we thinking?
Well, Amanda, we went into this thinking we weren't going to defame her, and by no means do we want to. But do you think someone like Professor Donna Hughes holding the chair for gender women's studies should hold that position, having those beliefs?
Yeah, I don't think you can say, you're a proponent for gender equality because that's what gender and women's studies and feminists are. Like, I don't think you can say that you're for gender equality by kind of invalidating the experiences of trans people and talking over them and kind of saying that their existence isn't real by calling them a fantasy. Like, I'm not, I'm no authority position at URI, but it makes me feel uncomfortable that someone in that kind of authoritative position like holds such old style feminist views, because like new age feminism is not exclusionary like this. So I don't know. It's just,
Well, speaking of uncomfortability, you said you take a class with her. Do you feel uncomfortable being in those classes now?
honestly, yeah, like doing my assignments last week, I was like, I don't like this is weird. Like nobody's saying anything. Like is everyone just gonna like there wasn't really a space within the class to be like, hey, because it's all online, so it's not like we can get to class and be like, oh my god, like da 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 da. Like it's weird. I'm just like doing these assignments for this woman, and I like know how she feels like on the side on this like random blog website that she like posts on, and it's like, okay, but next week we're supposed to learn about literally the topic of discussion this week is like transgenderism and sex-based rights versus gender-based rights. Like that's what the topic has been. So now I'm like, this is awkward.
Well,
Like,
do you think it's because people in the class don't know about the article?
I don't know. That's what I'm like. I wish there was more like ability to communicate about this, because I don't know if like my classmates know, because it was so like there was no, I guess is a good way to segue into like the reaction to it, because there wasn't really like a general I don't know, announcement of like Donna Hughes wrote this article and it's kind of transphobic. Like there was no I don't know, big thing about it. Like so okay, the reaction to it, I guess that's kind of where we can go into now. So I heard about it like through a third party, just people talking about it, spreading the word, because I guess things kind of spread because a change.org petition was started by two students, Angelina Gassaway and Catherine Brosnahan. They were encouraging URI to take disciplinary action to hold Hughes accountable for what she said. I don't know when the petition was started, but I'm assuming it's like kind of around the most recent weeks, because that's when action has picked up around this. And then on Tuesday, March 23rd, which was almost a month after the original article was written, URI put out a statement saying, quote, "The university does not support statements and publications by Professor Donna Hughes that espouse anti-transgender perspectives." Well, they also acknowledged her right to free speech and her right to academic freedom in teaching and scholarship. They did make sure to state, though, that a faculty member's First Amendment and academic freedom rights are not boundless, however, and should be exercised responsibly with due regard. So that's what URI had to say about it. They kind of were, denouncing what she was saying without fully saying that it was wrong for her to write the article, because that's kind of like tricky lines of, like right to free speech and academic freedom and whatnot. And then there was kind of radio silence about the situation until this past weekend, where 2 different emails were sent out to GWS students about the incident. I think it's interesting that they were sent out to just GWS students, like it wasn't to everyone at URI. And also that URI statement was like only put on the website, and it was apparently really hard to find. Like it was kind of buried within the website, so it wasn't easily accessible, which is strange. But the emails, the first one was from a URI alum. Her name's Nancy A. Caronia. She teaches at West Virginia University now. And so she wrote this email she kind of referenced recent transphobic legislation in West Virginia and nationwide violence against and murder of trans people, and trying to explain how dangerous Hughes's transphobic rhetoric is, which I appreciated this email from her because it was just very in-depth in explaining how this kind of thinking can be really dangerous for trans people. She's kind of like the only person to really come out and stand up against what Donna was saying. And then the second email, which came through on Sunday, was from the GWS faculty members at URI. It was very interesting. They didn't explicitly reference Hughes or her articles. Like they didn't mention her name or any, the article titles, but they stated, "We condemn statements that dehumanize people who identify as LGBTQIA+. We also condemn statements that dismiss race and intersectionality," which that's referencing a different problematic article about the Atlanta shootings, but we're not talking about that today because we don't have time. But they showed their support to the students affected, reaffirmed the right to free speech and how we should be allowed to have open dialogues about topics like this, which I agree with. We should talk about it. But they concluded by saying that the personhood and dignity of all LGBTQIA persons should not be up for debate, which I really appreciated that like end sentiment, because like, yeah, it's not up for debate. Like these people aren't a fantasy. They exist in the real world and deserve to be acknowledged and treated equally. So yeah, that's kind of the most of what has happened. Donna hadn't said anything about the situation until yesterday. Actually, she kind of made some subtle comments regarding the situation in the email she sent to my class. So I'm like, I don't know if this is like insider information, but she usually sends us an email each week going over like preparing us for the week ahead about like the topics that we'll be discussing. And so those topics are coincidentally about gender identity, transgenderism, and sex-based versus gender-based rights. We were already planning to learn about this, so it's kind of ironic that this is all happening at the same time. But she said, "I support the civil and human rights of all people, including transgender people. I believe all people, including transgender people, should be treated with respect and dignity." So she did make sure to, I don't know, I guess clear up that confusion, but still made sure to bring up the sex-based versus gender-based rights issue that she, I don't know, thinks people are equating gender to sex when we aren't. That's just simply what's not happening. That's why it's called transgender, not trans sex. So, yeah, that's it.
I mean, that's a lot to take in. You know, if you're in the position, or even if you're a student within the Gender Women's Studies program, this goes to everyone here. What would you do? Would you sign that petition? I would hope you would, but would you go even farther to try to maybe get her removed from that leadership position? Or, I don't know, I want to hear everyone's perspectives. Nick, if we want to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I would sign the petition. I did sign the petition. I'm personally not in the women's gender studies, but I think that it was just wrong. It was an article that I just don't understand why she wrote, which really bothers me. I don't really think that there was a position to write that article. I'm not looking to a cisgender woman to tell me about the struggles and plights of a transgender person, and I don't really care for your opinion. If that's not to be wrong, but I just don't. I don't care for that opinion. I care for the opinion of the people that are going through it. And yeah, there's a lot more I could say I disagreed with, but that's just the gist of it.
She almost kind of blamed it. Sorry.
No,
I was going to say, she almost tried to like use the excuse of boredom from the pandemic, I feel like, is how she like began that whole article. which kind of like startled me to begin with. I was like, so you're bored in the pandemic and this is what comes to your mind? The whole thing itself just really, I was just very shook, like reading that. I have never heard of such a perspective, especially like from someone who calls themselves a feminist. It was just very, I don't know, kind of warped in my opinion. But
yeah, definitely.
I was talking to somebody over the weekend, and I didn't like, being like a cisgender male, like this is, not something I have a lot of knowledge about. But they were telling me, in that essay, whatever article, she was basically implying that transgender women are not real women due to the fact that they can't reproduce. And and I just I'm gonna just be outright honest right now. I'm disgusted by that article. That was something I feel really bad being I don't feel comfortable having this professor represent our community as a whole. I'm just really upset that this is something that had come out and that it was pushed under a rug for almost an entire month too. It just goes to show the humanity in which we've reached and how awful it's gotten.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's shocking too that you think of University of Rhode Island being such a small school, almost very local for the community inside of it, and suddenly, of all places, the University of Rhode Island to have something like this. You would think it'd be like any other university in the country, somewhere south or even west or even up north more, but somehow Rhode Island has professors like these.
Yeah, and it was written. This got a little bit of attention. The Boston Globe wrote an article about this. I didn't read it because it's behind a paywall, and I was not paying to read one article because
Frojo picked it up too.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay,
Frojo picked it up as well. That's where I read it. When you guys actually sent this, I read the Frojo article, and that was where I got most of my information on it.
Yeah, it's definitely
it's just ridiculous. How can you speak on something so boldly, but so
so boldly?
She's seen as a leader, especially in the gender women's study.
Right. That's the part that kind of bothers me. How are you going to hold this leadership position and stand for something that you don't even personally believe in the proper way?
Exactly. And when I originally heard about it, I was it might be a business professor or something like that. And then when I heard it was the genders and women's studies professor, I was like, wow, this is really messed up.
It was that's what got me the most too, Caden. I was like, what the heck? Just going against yourself.
I mean, what is she teaching students too, right? Is she teaching the same rhetoric? Maybe.
I mean, that's what kind of brought it full circle to me, because I've never had a class with Donna before. I'm a gender women's studies minor, so I've heard of her before and what people think of her. I went into the class just being oh, I think she's a little bit of a hard teacher, kind of a hard grader, whatever. But that was all I've heard. And I started taking this class, and I was I always thought something was a little bit off with the way she was teaching feminism, because the way I think of feminism is getting rid of gender roles and gender expectations so that nobody is advantaged or disadvantaged because of their gender or sex. And that goes for anyone, whereas I felt her approach was a little bit more based in women's liberation, which, thinking about it, she's an older woman. She came up with second wave feminism, and so that's kind of, I think, where her focus is. That's the perspective she's coming from, because her ideas aren't new. There's a lot of TERFs, which is a trans exclusionary radical feminists, that are a little bit older, white, cis women who have this kind of same, way of thinking about feminism and, I don't know, who it's for or who it should benefit, how it works and whatnot. So her ideas aren't unique. It's just kind of stuck in the past, where I wish that she was just kind of thinking about feminism in the modern age.
It's absolutely insane to think about that. What also is insane is that we had so much else to talk about today, and we're already at 20 minutes. But guess what? We can always talk about that next week. I think it's really important to dedicate an episode purely to this topic because of how controversial it is right now, and it's something that frankly shouldn't be controversial. But hopefully something can be done about it going on. but we'll have to wait and see how that goes down in a future episode. Until then, we have plenty of other stuff to talk about, but you're going to have to wait until next week. Thank you very much, guys, for being on here today, and we're going to be going off for a little bit while we have another set of people coming on by.
And tomorrow is Trans Visibility Day, so
Yes.
If you're at URI, go to the quad tomorrow. They're having a Trans Visibility Day, little parader. Yeah.
Yes. On a lighter note.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Bye.
Later.